The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop, Improving Comprehension or Comprehension Strategies. My name is Cynthia, one of the instructors with Iris Reading based out of Chicago. I want to quickly confirm that you can hear my voice and you can see my screen. If you could drop a message either in the chat, I would appreciate it, or maybe give me a thumbs up and let me know that, again, you can see my screen, you can hear my voice, and you can see me. This workshop is brought to you today by Iris Reading, a company that is based out of Chicago. And okay, I see myself there. Just wanted to confirm. Sorry, everyone. And so what we're known for really is our speed reading workshops. We've offered these in over 100 cities around the world. We are slowly creating some new content, and this is something new that we launched at the beginning of March, which is Comprehension Strategies. So if you're a student and you're maybe struggling to understand some of the materials, you're reading it and comprehension isn't as fast or as easy as you'd hoped it'd be, right? Then today's workshop, I hope, helps you out just a little bit, okay? If you'd like to share where you're joining us from today, feel free to drop that in the chat section. We have, as I said, offered this in over 100 cities around the world. You may have never heard of us before, and that's okay. That just means we have to come to a city by you. And these workshops, we've worked with really community colleges, Ivy League, everything in between that. We've worked with a lot of high school students. We've worked with Google, LinkedIn, NASA, United States Army, just to name a few organizations that we have, again, partnered with. And really goes to show you that reading and learning, it doesn't necessarily stop when you graduate high school or when you graduate college. This is something that even people that have been working and they've graduated years ago still struggle with. Okay, so again, we do hope that this workshop you do find beneficial. Please, please, if you know anybody that may be struggling with comprehension specifically, definitely forward this over to them or refer them to our channel. We are going to use a few documents for today's presentation. Now, you can also read it off of my screen, but if for some reason you can't see it, right, or you just want to pop it open in a separate tab, go ahead and type in your browser at this time, irisreading.com/comp, C-O-M-P for comprehension. Okay, so we'll be using those a little later today. Really quickly sharing our social media. So we are very happy that 2023 was the year we have decided to launch on social media. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook group, a reading group. So if you want to share what you're reading, maybe a great book or an awful book, you want to give us a rant on something you read that you didn't necessarily appreciate, we'd love to hear about it on our Book Lovers Facebook group. We're also slowly building up a following on TikTok. We are on Instagram, and obviously you all are watching us today on our YouTube. So again, if you do enjoy the content, we'd appreciate a like, a follow, or a subscription. Now, we have what is called the IRIS method here at Iris Reading, and it's essentially a 4-step study process. Okay, it's a method we want you to use when approaching anything technical, whenever reading, whenever studying. Now, I'll also give you a breakdown on the workshops behind each of these 4 iris steps. So the inspect is essentially inspecting something before you read it. Make sure you understand what the structure is, how long are the chapters, how many pictures, what are the vocabulary words, right? All of that you want to look at before you start to read. Maybe it reminds us back in the day we were told we should never look ahead when reading, right? But that does help with comprehension, and it also helps with your attention and your focus, okay? Because maybe you don't need to read this right now, which means that we can push this aside to later. That brings us to our second step. After you've inspected, you decide if you are or are not going to read this, okay? Again, like we said, maybe this can wait for later. Third step, we want to make sure you're asking questions. All the questions, right? What does this have to do with anything? Why am I reading this? Why would my teacher make me read this, right? All of that. If you can't answer those questions, then you shouldn't move on to the final step, which is storing, okay, or memorizing the information. So inspect and read are discussed in our speed reading workshop. Inquire is discussed in our note-taking workshop, and memory is broken down in our memory techniques workshop. So if you're looking for some extra support in any of those areas, again, these workshops will be offered for free for a limited time, so check us out. Same way you signed up for today's class. Now, we have to read a lot as students, right? And I'm also a student, so I include myself in this mix. And it's not always super easy to understand what we're reading. Unfortunately, things don't always make sense. So sometimes we have to ask some questions, right? The problem is that we don't always know what kind of questions we should be asking to deepen our comprehension. So we have a few questions, actually 6, that we are going to break down today with one subject that I'm pretty sure most of us are like, oh, well, yeah, I understand what that is. I comprehend that perfectly. We will see. Okay, so our 6 dimensions, if you will, first being, can you explain what you're reading? Okay, if you can't explain what you're reading or you can't explain what you're learning, then you probably don't really understand what's happening here, right? Second one, what are the different perspectives on this material? Believe it or not, you can find opposing views on pretty much anything nowadays. So we want to look at what other people's opposing perspectives are on the material. It can help you better understand what you think you already know. 4 is your self-knowledge. So we want to tie you, everything you, into this process as well. Who you are, what you like, what you don't like, where you go every day, right? What your routine is like. Moving on to empathy, we want to tap in some emotion when we're learning as well, even if it's not necessarily a subject that invokes emotion. We will get there in a moment. How can this be applied practically? And this is really important when we're reading through something we just don't like, right? I'm sure we've all thought, how in the world is this going to be used in the real world? Maybe we felt that way in high school when taking like an algebra class or something like that. Right? I know I felt that way, and it wasn't until I got to college I was like, oh, I should have paid attention. And our final dimension is, how has this been interpreted by others? Okay, not necessarily interpreted as in a language, right, or a translation. We're more so thinking, what are the different versions of interpretation? For example, some people can take a piece, an artistic piece like a painting, and that will be interpreted into some kind of musical piece, right? It'll inspire something like that. So that's the kind of interpretation that we're talking about, okay? Now, before we get into the 6 dimensions and this one topic that I'm sure most of us are fairly aware of, we understand it pretty well, let's assess your comprehension right now, okay? So without using the 6 dimensions. So we are going to read through something together right now, irisreading.com/comp, and you're going to look, you can, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, you can pop this link up in a separate tab in your browser, or you can just read it off of my screen, whatever you want, okay? But this is the article you're looking for because there are 2 in that Dropbox link. So it's focusrituals.pdf. And this is the article. This is what it looks like. You'll notice the timer ticking away right here. You've got 2 minutes. Just read and then give me a percentage in the chat once you finish of what your comprehension was when reading this. Okay, so I will disable my webcam. Make a note of the time at the top. Make sure we want to maximize our time here. Okay, so here we go. We've got 2 minutes to read. Go ahead and start. All right, very good. So we read the article. If you didn't finish, that is okay. Let me know what your percentage of comprehension was. Do you think you understood like 90%, 80%, 60%? Okay. Now, of course, we don't necessarily have time to break down the 6 dimensions in this article, right? Because we have to make sure we keep the presentation in under an hour. But in the future, keep in mind you don't have to time yourself. Again, we just have to make sure we're keeping this under an hour. But when studying, let's see if we can implement these 6 dimensions that we're going to break out right now, okay? So let's talk about something that most of us are fairly aware of, and that is of gravity, right? We know when something goes up, it's going to fall down, right? There's no question about it. So you might think I have really good comprehension on this. I get it. It's all good, right? However, okay, so let's say we understand that one basic fact that I think most of us learned like in 4th grade. Can you explain then how the theory of relativity ties in to gravity, right? Can you maybe explain how quantum physics ties in, or even this, do you know how distance ties into gravity, right? Now, some of us might be like, whoa, wait a minute, hold on, I don't, okay? So do we really understand gravity then? All right. The funny thing that sometimes we do think we understand something really well, and it's not until we start asking these questions that we realize maybe I don't. So the first dimension, right, of comprehension, we want to make sure you can successfully complete is of explaining something. Can you explain it? And this reminds me of Feynman's technique, right? Feynman's method of taking notes. One of these steps is explaining something in simple terms as well as in elaborate terms, right? So unfortunately, most people stop there. They can explain it and they don't try to deepen their comprehension anymore. And that's not a good thing. We want you to explain this to really anybody that's going to ask you questions. So maybe it's a classmate, maybe it's your professor, maybe it's your 6-year-old sister or brother. And if you answer to them, maybe they ask you, well, why does the apple fall? And you say, because it's gravity, just because, that's just how it works. That's not a good enough answer, okay? We want to be able to explain it further, because the point is for them to ask questions again, and you are maybe reevaluating what you thought you understood really well. So if they ask, why will the ball roll down the ramp? Why will this happen with gravity? We need to find the answers to that so that we can actually claim to understand and be able to explain this first area of comprehension. Now notice we are asking a lot of questions right now and we won't answer them, because if you are interested, the point is to get you to dive deeper, okay, to do research. Try to find out why this is happening. We don't want you to stop at just being able to superficially explain something, or explain something where it sounds like you're pretty much just repeating the definition that you maybe read in a book, in a dictionary, right? That's not understanding. Being able to memorize what is written is not necessarily comprehension. We want to actually have that information permeate our brains when learning. So if you can explain it, good job. If you speak another language, see if you can explain it in another language. If you have parents that have never taken a class like this, explain it to them. See what interesting questions they bring out. Okay, so this is the first dimension of comprehension. Let's move on to the second one, which is the different perspectives. Okay, as we said, there can be different perspectives on a lot of things these days. And we are going to talk about the different perspectives of gravity now. Did you know that there is actually in existence an organization, and they call themselves the AGA, the Anti-Gravity Alliance, and they claim that gravity is a lie, okay? For example, they ask a bunch of questions here. If gravity exists, then how do birds, bats, and insects fly? How do airplanes fly? Why do balloons float up? We get it, right? They don't believe in gravity. They also claim to have a list of supporting websites. So if you thought maybe this is just a one-off, no, looks like they've got another 10 websites, organizations that support them, okay? There are also different websites we found like this. So this is the National Center for Science Education, the NCSE. And now they have written that gravity is only a theory. So when we see something that says theory and we thought we had something like a fact, that might start to confuse us a little bit, right? Because we thought, well, wait a minute, I thought gravity was a legitimate thing. Like, why then? We just said things fall down, they don't float up. So why is that not a fact, and why is it just a theory? Moving on, people who have submitted their dissertations, right, for a PhD are writing on why gravity is a myth. Okay, these are scholars, and we even have an astrophysicist named Dr. Brian Keating who claims he does not believe in gravity. Okay, now you can take this information and say, oh, well, they must just be funny people, but can you defend your belief in gravity against their perspective, right? their papers that they've written, their articles, right? These websites that claim to support that gravity doesn't exist. Dr. Brian Keating, would you be willing to go up against Dr. Brian Keating to say, this is why you're wrong and I'm right, right? Now we take something we thought we knew really well and we're like, oh boy, I guess not. Now, you don't necessarily have to believe the other side, but you should be able to explain to them why you feel a certain way, right? Why your thoughts are against that point of view. If you can't, then that means that you yourself are not 100% solid on the theory of gravity, okay? So, something to think about. Now we're meditating, we're getting the juices flowing here. Who would have thought? Who knew, right? So this is the second dimension. Look for different perspectives. See if you can challenge those different perspectives. Can you defend your opinion? Okay. Moving on to the next step, your self-knowledge. And guess what? It actually is all about you. Everything. When it comes to learning, right? Because you're the one that's going to have to take the test. So yeah, it's all about you. So what does this mean? That we want to look for some function and purpose when we are learning anything, okay? So for example, Easter just passed, right? It was this past weekend, and my neighbors were having a tremendous party next door. I mean, they were partying till about 3 o'clock in the morning, Easter weekend. And I couldn't sleep. Right? Obviously, when your neighbors are blasting music through the walls, you're not going to be able to sleep. So the next day, and maybe you can relate to this as well, right? If you haven't slept, maybe you need some eye drops, something that can help you kind of just come to life. So when using eye drops, if you've ever done this before, you don't have to worry about the drops floating up, right? You know that the drops are going to float or come down into your eyeball. You might not always hit your eyeball, right? But it's coming down, so you know this is some practical function. This is a purpose, right? With gravity, we don't have a problem here. So I know this is a very simple example, but we want to do this every time we're learning something new. Look for that function and purpose as well, okay? Now, moving on to the next dimension, that is of empathy. Empathy. Think about that, having to tie in some feelings into what you're learning, okay? So you want to empathize, you want to tap into those emotions as you're learning. And yes, you can empathize with algebra, for example, or subjects that some people just don't gel with. How will we empathize with gravity, though? Well, let's think about someone who maybe has to go through long periods without gravity, like astronauts, okay? Astronauts do have to go through some time with no gravity, which means that while maybe here on Earth we can do things no problem, we don't worry about what's going to happen next, we know gravity is going to take care of us, right? What about when our astronauts are up in space? Let's think about something we do here on Earth, maybe every day, and we've never really wondered how this would be if we had no gravity. Have you ever thought about what it's like to go to the bathroom up in space? Just think about that for a second. Someone might be saying, oh my goodness, no way, Jose. Just a thought, okay? So, there's no gravity up in space. So you got to go to the bathroom, which means it's probably going to be a bit of a disaster, I would imagine, right? But we did some research. We found this article from the Smithsonian. The article's title was, How Do Astronauts Go to the Bathroom in Space? A look at the space shuttle toilet and the deepest, darkest secret about space flight. So, again, because we're talking about how everything needs to float up, right, in space. So that means that whatever you're putting in the toilet, it would be floating out of the toilet, okay? So let's see here. It says for solid waste deposits, it's a very nice way of putting it, the toilet has foot straps and thigh braces to help astronauts stay in place, and airtight bags on hand for toilet paper disposal. Astronauts spend a lot of time in training sitting on space toilets to learn how to create a strong seal and how to align themselves properly. In Houston, the Johnson Space Center has a bathroom with 2 space toilets for practice. One model is fully functional. The other, a positional trainer, has a video camera beneath its rim and a television monitor on a table in front of it. Astronaut Mike Massimo called this second toilet the deepest, darkest secret about spaceflight in the training video. Now, think about that. You've got to make sure that you're positioned perfectly. You got to make sure that there's nothing coming out of the toilet, right? I watched a really cool TikTok the other day of an astronaut that was washing her hair, and she had like this cup with a straw, and she would squeeze the cup and the water would she was trying to squeeze the water into her scalp, but the water was just coming out, so she would catch it and she would kind of push it into her head like this, and she'd use like some kind of I think it was like a powder shampoo, and she'd kind of just rub it into her scalp, and that was how she washed her hair. So I mean, I enjoy taking nice long luxurious showers, and I enjoy having the water run through my hair, but I don't think that that's something that astronauts can do when they're up in space, right? Here's another fun question. We maybe burp down here on Earth, no problem. But do you know what happens when you burp up in space? And I will give you a hint. When you look it up, you're going to find something that says chunky bubbles. And that's as far as we'll go there. But look it up. Look it up. You might be interested. You might want to know. Ooh, okay, so can you now maybe empathize with astronauts a little bit more? Because again, we do things every day, all the time, no problem. We maybe take for granted the fact that we have this force, this gravity force here on Earth. Moving on to the next step. How can this be applied practically? Okay, practically. So this one is pretty simple because we've already talked a lot about different application with gravity. We know if we throw something up in the air, it's going to come crashing down, right? So a question you can ask, especially when the subject is just not our thing, how can this be applied in the larger world? Okay, you really got to think about it sometimes. Now it's pretty standard, pretty easy with gravity, but not so much with other subjects. Okay, and you'll notice that when doing these different dimensions again, you'll notice that some are a little more challenging than others, and that's okay. Okay, maybe application with a different subject would be really hard to find, and that's fine. That's your homework. Okay. So that is practical application. And now our final dimension is that of interpretation. So how has this been interpreted by others? Now there have been many paintings inspired by gravity, right? Many musical compositions inspired by gravity as well. But we found something even cooler than that. And that was of these different sculptures around the world. They're called gravity-defying sculptures, okay? Because we have a pretty good understanding now of gravity. We've asked questions, we've challenged our thoughts on the subject. So this shouldn't be possible, right? And this is called The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn. It's a fantastic sculpture, really. Here's another one. This is in the Fontainebleau in Paris. And this is real. I have no idea what amount, no amount actually of glue can keep this thing up in the air like that, right? This elephant. This is amazing, right? Because gravity should send this statue crashing down. The floating rocks in Cairo. Amazing, right? How is this How is this staying upright? It's a good question, right? Or we've got these book sculptures that are around Madrid. Again, no amount of glue can keep that like that, okay? So we're talking about gravity. We know what goes up must come down. So how are these statues able to stay upright like that? Maybe we need to do some more homework so that we can answer those questions, okay? So let's go over the 6 dimensions again. And we're actually playing around with creating either a sticky note or a worksheet so that if you're maybe struggling again with comprehension, you use it and check it off. Or maybe we're playing around with including some lines where you can actually write out your explanation, the different perspectives, your self-knowledge, so on and so forth. So if you have a recommendation, go ahead and leave it in the comments or in the chat section so that we can take a look at it. We have an idea of what we want to do, but we also want some feedback from our participants. So we'll go in quickly in summary of what we've discussed. The different dimensions with comprehension, again, really important. Number 1, explain it. Explain it well, but don't stop at explaining, okay? The point is that someone should be poking holes in what you think you already know. And sure, if you want to explain it to yourself and maybe just talk to the wind, that's fine. Maybe you want to find the right words, but try to explain it. It's preferable when you explain it to other people. Okay, if you can explain it to others, that way they can ask questions and everybody benefits, right? Second are the different perspectives. Not everyone will have an opposing view on gravity. I'm sorry, like this opposing view on gravity, but you'd be surprised with the amount of opposition you can find on certain subjects. So look that up as well. Make sure you are doing your research. It'll help deepen that understanding. Number 3 is your self-knowledge. So tie this into you, your routine, what you do on a daily basis. How can this apply there? Can you empathize with the material, with the subject? Why is this author a renowned author in this field? Why is he a professional, maybe on the field, the leader of this field? Okay. What led maybe the psychologist to write this piece on this subject? What has happened in their life? For example, these are some questions that you can ask that motivated them to pursue this field, right? So keep that in mind, okay? Ask all the questions. How can this be applied practically in the real world? And our final dimension, how has this been interpreted by others, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's even in another language, right? We know that things that are interpreted sometimes lose their meaning. So what is maybe if you do speak another language, what is the interpretation of a different language on this subject, okay? So we want to tie in inspection before you read as well. This is discussed. We'll give you a sneak peek as to our speed reading workshop. Inspect anything you need to read before you read it, whether you're reading something out of a textbook, a report, a journal article, one of those really long menus that are like 9 pages long, anything like that, you want to inspect before you read. And these are the things you're looking for before you inspect: the intro, the headings and subheadings, the words in bold, the titles of charts, tables, and diagrams, the conclusion, as well as any questions that may be published in this piece. All of this you are looking for when you inspect. And while you do this, this is great for taking notes as well, familiarizing yourself with what will be discussed in class later. Now let's do our reading comprehension test one more time. Now I know that we're not going to have as much time to break down all of the dimensions, but maybe just one. After you read this, think about it for a second, okay? And then we'll assess your comprehension again. So this is Going with the Flow. You can find this article at irisreading.com/comp, and the title is flow.pdf. By the way, if you want any of the articles that we've brought out in today's class, I have the book. The author has actually allowed us to share this book with our participants. So if you'd like that, I'll share my email at the end. Let's inspect this article. It says Going with the Flow. Okay, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. Number one, realize you can't control everything. Number two, become aware. 3, breathe. 4, get perspective. 5, practice. 6, laugh. And 7, realize that you can't control others. This passage is selected from the book Focus, a Simplicity Manifesto in the Age of Distraction by Leo Babauta. Okay, so I will give you now 2 minutes to read the article, and then we will assess your comprehension a second time. Here we go, everyone. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, very good. So we read the article. Maybe we're thinking now on some of those dimensions, right? We're not going to break down all of them. We don't have enough time. Maybe you're thinking about empathy, right? Going with the flow, maybe being a little less hard on yourself, empathizing with yourself, right? But remember, these dimensions are supposed to help deepen your comprehension. So now, give yourself a score again with comprehension. What would you say your comprehension is? This is a different article. Would you say that after maybe thinking about some of those dimensions, your comprehension went up a little bit? Okay, even if it was so much as maybe 5%, the point is that we are increasing our comprehension, improving our comprehension. Okay, so if you did make an improvement, tremendous job. That's excellent. Again, this recording will be available, so if you need to listen to it again, if you maybe want some additional support, I'll share my email at the end of the presentation. You can always reach out to me as well. Make sure that when you're inspecting, you're getting the gist of things first, okay? So we're not necessarily inspecting because we want to get as much information as possible. That's not what the purpose of that is. It's more so to understand the structure, understand what words will be discussed, see the picture, see the table, see all of that. Okay. This again is our IRIS method, so we'll share it one more time. Want to make sure you inspect anything you need to read before you read it or you don't read it, right? You decide. Ask questions and then follow up with storing, memorizing this information, okay? So all of this, you want to make sure that you are thinking about as you approach reading and learning. You don't want to just do it willy-nilly, because then, if it's not organized, you might have a systematic approach to learning, and if you don't have, a routine, comprehension might be really hard. So we want to make sure we are using a method that obviously works for you. Now, if you'd like a copy of that book that we mentioned for today, you can send me an email at cynthia@irisreading.com, and I can send it over to you for free, no problem. Some of those articles that we read earlier are based, or actually out of, this really, really good book by Leo Babauta. Thank you so much for checking out today's video. Please send me an email again. Any questions, if you need any additional support, anything like that, I would love to help you out. Again, my email is cynthia@irisreading.com. Our social media is below, so remember, you're obviously watching us on our YouTube channel. We are on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook. So thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you in a future workshop, everyone. Have a good one. Bye-bye.